Now we will discuss the experimental studies on aphasia. We will now look at the psycholinguistic research that has clarified the role of syntactic and semantic processes in various aphasias. The traditional view has been that Broca's or agrammatic aphasia is a production deficit and Wernicke's comprehension deficit. So the research on these areas or aphasia goes back to mid or late 1800s, where Carl Wernicke and Broca developed their research and linked specific lesion in the brain to some specific damage to the language ability. As we have seen that Broca's patients, they suffer from speech production disability, and the Wernicke's patients, they suffer from basically comprehension problem. Now, centuries later, another area has been emerged, and that is the syntactic area. So studies show that there is a specific area in brain that deals with syntax. Broca's patient typically produce the kind of language such as speech halted, omitting the inflections and words with syntactic functions. So the idea is to look at now these studies which prove that certain type of damage in the brain does affect syntax selectively. Now, the implicit assumption with regard to the studies is that the underlying language representation is intact with Broca's patients, but they have difficulty putting appropriately formulating linguistic messages into word. That is, they conceptualize sentences normally, but have difficulty translating them into productive speech. Broca's aphasics have often been viewed as having normal comprehension. There are good reasons for questioning this assumption. For one, many of the tests of comprehension have been extremely global in nature and do not clarify the respective roles of syntactic and semantic processes in comprehension. For another, it is possible to disguise deficits in comprehension somewhat more easily than deficits in production. Now, the later area points, it was brought out in a study by Karamazov. Who examined comprehension capacities in Broca's, Wernicke's and conduction aphasics. Patients, they heard a sentence and then had to choose which of two pictures corresponding to sentences. Some sentences were similar, such as the book that the girl is reading, yellow, and then another sentence, the horse that the bear is kicking, is brown. Now here, knowing that girls read books but not vice versa is sufficient to understand the sentence correctly. In contrast, in sentence 2, it is semantically possible for either the horse or the bear to be doing the kicking. Now, one needs to process the syntactic structure carefully to arrive at the correct interpretation. So how did the three aphasic groups they performed on this test? Wernicke's aphasics did poorly on the both types of sentences in agreement with their known difficulties with comprehension. More interestingly, both Broca's aphasics and conduction aphasics performed very well on non-reversible sentences, but their performance fell to chance levels on the reversible sentence. These results suggest that both groups suffer from subtle syntactic deficits in comprehension that are revealed once semantic cues were eliminated. The researchers suggest that Broca's area may be necessary to perform some syntactic operations. Syntactic deficits may thus appear in the conduction physics as a result of the dissociation of Wernicke's and Broca's area. Then we have a research done by Sweeney et al. And they investigated the ability of Broca's and Wernicke's patients to comprehend subject-relative clause. The gymnast loved the professor from the northwestern city who complained about the bad coffee. To study comprehension of this structure, the Zuroff et al. Sweeney, they used a cross-modal lexical priming task in which individuals listened to a sentence over earphones while simultaneously performing a lexical decision task on letter strings that were presented visually. Some of the words, for example, teacher, in the lexical decision task were semantically related to the moved noun and others were not. If the trace caused comprehenders to reactive the antecedent noun professor, then a semantically related word teacher should be primed and thus receive a faster lexical decision time. The difficulties Broca's physics have with sentences such as this is that they cannot activate the moved noun quickly enough to appropriately interpret the subsequent pronoun. As a consequence, their comprehension as a whole suffers. These subtle syntactic deficits appear to be the basis for some of the processes that Broca's patient used. Consider sentence 6 and 7. Broca's patients comprehend 6, which is, it was the girl who chased the boy, but not it was the boy whom the girl chased. When Broca's physics fail to understand sentence such as 7, their errors are not random. Rather, they apply a strategy in which the first noun is treated as the agent of the sentence. So we see that the syntactic functions have also been to some extent impaired due to some lesion in the different parts of the brain, or especially the part of the brain which deals with the language processing. Thus, Broca's patients resort to simple strategy resulting in performance on sentences, presumably due to their inability to rapidly analyze the syntactic structure. In case of Wernicke's aphasia, the ability to grasp the meaning is impaired, while the case of producing connected speech is not affected.